first, it's been years since we last did this. We're asking who would homeschool their kids. Joining us now, though, a former journalist and homeschooler, Christopher Lloyd. He gave up his job, I think, 10 years ago, wasn't it?
That's right,
to homeschool your two girls.
Yeah, with my wife. She was actually more important than me,
Okay.
I have to say.
Matilda and Verity.
Yes, that's right.
Why? Why would you do it?
Well, we didn't mean to. I mean, Matilda, when she was 7, she was at a school, and she was a very precocious, young, curious child who, you know, everything you would want your child to be, loved reading books, loved going to school. And then the next year, when she changed teacher and she changed year group, everything changed really quite dramatically over about a 3-week period. And first of all, she didn't want to go to school. She stopped reading books. She stopped asking questions. And so we really felt like...
3 weeks, a total change.
Really a huge change.
Bullying or something like that?
It was, I think, we discovered what the problem was. We went to see the teacher, and we realised that the teacher was doing her best efforts, but she was focusing on the kids who weren't doing very well in the tests. And in those days, they did SATs tests when you were 7. And the kids who were doing well in the tests were being ignored. And so all that curiosity and that appetite for learning really was being sort of given just mind-numbingly repetitive things to do. And in a frighteningly short space of time, this manifested itself in a disease of the brain, which we call boredom.
How old were the two girls at the time?
So 7 and 5.
And 5, okay.
And so we looked around for another school, we talked to the headmistress and all the rest of it, and that obviously this school wasn't going to work because they weren't really listening to what we were saying. And we couldn't find any school that really had a more creative kind of put curiosity at the top of the agenda. It was all about passing tests and having, you know, good rules and regulations and everything. So we thought, well, we'll take a year out. Well, we don't want to make a mistake and find the wrong school. Why don't we educate them at home? How much more damage could we do in a year? And so we did it. And, you know, it was the beginning of an adventure that's changed all our lives.
Did you have any kind of teaching experience at all?
Not really, not formally. I mean, obviously, I've been to school and I'm a student of life.
Yeah,
you know,
that's it.
But that's really about all you need, to be perfectly honest.
And what about some of the questions you guys? Michael?
Yeah, I was just wondering, did you sort of teach them the same kind of things that they would have learnt in primary school?
Really interesting. We started off doing that, and it was a disaster. So we thought what we'll do is we'll create a schoolroom at home. We'll have lots of books. We'll get a timetable off the internet. We'll get a syllabus. We'll have a time, you know, almost have a bell and a clock.
Yeah.
And after 3 months, we sat Matilda down. We thought we'll have a review. How's it going? Guess what she said? I'm bored. Disaster. You know, we've gone off the precipice. We've done it a bit like a cartoon character going off a cliff. You know, thinking, my goodness, you know, what have we done here? And then we started really thinking about it, read some books, talked to some people, and we sort of looked through the lens the other way around. And we sat Matilda down, and we asked her a question nobody had bothered to ask her, aged 8, whether in school or otherwise. And we said, Matilda, what are you interested in?
What did she say?
Penguins.
Penguins?
Well, of course. How many people here are you interested in penguins?
Yeah.
Right. Everybody loves penguins, right? Yeah. So, eureka! So we went to see the penguins at London Zoo. We did a project about the Antarctic, which used to be by the equator a few 100 million years ago, by the way. That's amazing. You know, we live on these giant jigsaw puzzle pieces that go all the way around the world, and this one's down at the bottom. That's fantastic. And then they live in groups. Why do they live in groups? To keep warm. And then one little penguin left one group and went to another one. Why did they do that? No idea. Write a story. Maybe it was bullied. They're doing creative writing now. And then she's interested in ice because this is where the penguins live. So ice is amazing because when you heat it up, it turns to water. When you heat that up, it turns to steam. Well, what temperatures that happen? You go to the fridge, you get the ice cube, you get the kettle out. You know, you are amazing. You can do everything. You could wish your child to learn through penguins.
Christopher, can I just say, you're so
He's very good, isn't he?
Have you got some spare time to teach Mike? You are incredibly careful. Even I was drawn in.
Are you still homeschooling them now? I mean, how far
well,
did
we
you go?
took it till the age of 11.
So to the end of
So it was basically end of it was 5 or 6 years. And we thought we were educating the kids, and I began to realise that it was a new journey for all of us, and I was learning from the children. And one thing that really was, we bought a camper van and we went around Europe for 6 months, and I jacked in my job, as I explained, for a year. And I realised it's much better if you can, you have to organise your life.
Did you fine yourself for taking them out of school?
Well, I said, look, I'll sign a piece of paper and I'll retire at 75. Just can I have 5 years off along the way, you know, while the kids are younger? And then you can create a bit more of a dynamic family environment while they're younger, rather than just absconding and working, you know, your nuts off, as it were, until, and then you realise that you want to spend some time with your kids and they've left home. You know, that's terrible, really. So what I discovered was, we went on this camper van trip, and we were in this museum in this place in Spain about Roman artifacts and things. And Matilda looked up at me and she said, "Look at that amazing glass vase." And I said to her, "That's amazing. I didn't know the Romans made glass. I thought maybe that was the Venetians, you know, 1,000 years ago." And she looked up at me and she said, Dad, you mean to say I know something you don't know? And I said, yeah. And she spent the rest of the day with a clipboard going around the whole museum finding out everything I don't know. Now, I realised then that if you don't know something and your child finds out, it creates a completely different experience in their brain. It's like dopamine being released, you know. And it's like a treasure hunt. It's not like learning now. And actually, all you have to do is facilitate the curiosity that's inherent in the child's mind, and you're off. And you create this incredible dynamic. It's really difficult to do that in school or a classroom where the teacher knows everything and all you can do is get something wrong.
Okay, now I know Alex wants to ask about money, didn't he?
But I'm amazed. I think you make it sound such a brilliant idea. But the only thing that how did you cope financially? Because obviously you have to stop working.
Sure.
So how did that work?
I completely understand. And I was lucky enough that I had some savings.
Right.
And I thought, I'm going to spend those savings now. We're going to spend a year doing this now. And I'm going to throw caution to the wind. And I'm going to, I suppose you could call it confidence or too much confidence, but I'm going to try and get a job afterwards. But I haven't had a job since. I've been writing books about this and visiting schools and home ed groups, giving lectures and talks. And I've, it's actually become my life now. And I'm very fortunate. I feel it's the most privileged job in the world.
What about the social side? Because a lot of people think, that the best part about being in school, certainly the best part for me of school, was my friends, who are my friends to this day.
Yeah.
If you're just with your siblings, you are slightly isolated.
Yeah.
Aren't
This
you,
is
from the
probably
mainstream?
the biggest myth about home education. It comes up again and again. And first of all, they're not just with their siblings, because you can check them into groups. There's so much going on locally that you miss if you're not listening out for it. You know, there are
Other homeschoolers or...
There are definitely networks all over the country. I visit them frequently, but I also visit schools frequently, because the two are both of equal fascination to me. But they can go and play tennis or dance groups or whatever. They're both girls, so they were into dancing, all that kind of stuff. And there were lots of local things, orchestras, that music is a big part of their lives. But the big thing is that they're not with the same age group in the same classroom, day in, day out. In many ways, the social pressures on a child, you get a couple of dominant personalities in a class of 30 kids, and a child can close up and their social appetite can become very stifled.
Okay, then what about the transition? So I'm trying to think, the youngest Verity would have had 4 years homeschooling?
Matilda had 4, Verity had 6. Yeah.
So 6 years homeschooling, and then into a state C, comprehensive, or, So how was that transition?
Right, well, I have to say that is the trickiest bit.
Yeah.
And the best
Not
advice
easier,
I can give is you want to find a small school. Big schools have big problems, in my experience of view. The bigger you make a school, the more steps there are between the empathy of a teacher and an individual child. And so we did, fortunately, find a school that had about 300, 350 pupils, which was very small for a secondary school. And it had the right sort of environment to cope with someone who was used to dealing with people of different age groups rather than just the same age group. So I think if you went from a homeschooling environment into a giant school of 1,500 pupils, you would suffer issues. Probably.
I'm right thinking Matilda's often a place in Cambridge for music, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I think she's doing her A-levels today, so she's got to get her grades.
Well, good luck, good luck.
She's got a place if she can get her grades, which would be fantastic.
Which is, I hope this doesn't come across practical. I'm just thinking about the things people said about your enthusiasm and ability to communicate. There's a part of me who thinks it's a tragedy that you are restricted to just teaching your own kids when if you're in a classroom,
no, I'm not. I was at school in Birmingham yesterday, in a place called Smethwick, surrounded by year 8s from every walk of life you could imagine. I was having a ball. We did the complete plays of Shakespeare 3 times.
But do you fancy full-time teaching?
No, because I don't want to get stuck in one institution and deal with all the politics and all the rubbish like that. I want to get out and spend my time with as many different types of kids as possible.
Amazing.
But not everybody being homeschooled will be as lucky as your daughters were, because you have
well,
such a zest
it's not
for life.
actually. I have to say, sincerely, I sort of came in at the side and did my bit, and I benefited from it. Mrs. Lloyd, who isn't here, she has to take a lot of the credit because she really was the prime educator in the home. But I do think a kind of a together home environment is terribly, terribly important, whether it's school or not. I mean, you think a child's education, you don't think that they're just learning at school, and they're just learning at the week times, and they're just learning at sort of term times. Learning is having all the time around you, and your brain is configured to connect things together, and its natural state, it wants to learn.
There must be some downsides. I mean, a couple... maybe
honestly, I'm trying to think. I mean, making the decision is hard, because everybody thinks, I'll never have enough patience. Yeah. That's what they say. And actually, all the home ed groups that I visit, as well as the schools, I do find that usually you know, you do have enough patience. It's a bit like sort of jumping off a, you know, a plane with a parachute for the first time. It's making the leap. And once you've done it once, you realise, yeah, I can do this. There are ups and downs, and there are going to be stresses, but you know what? There are anyway.
And you mentioned you write books. This is the last question before we take the break. You've got these have been inspired by your experience.
Yeah.
So it's like the history of the planet.
Hit the world. Because I realised that I didn't have an interconnected knowledge myself. And when I was 36, I realised, this is 10 years ago, that's the history of the world on a timeline. It's called a wall book. And I realised I didn't know how old the Earth was. Actually, out of interest, how many people here know the age of the Earth? Put your hand up if you've got an idea. There's one.
How many hours? 16 million years.
16 million or billion? Doesn't matter because it's both wrong. 16 billion. Okay.
I don't believe the Earth actually exists, that we're just imaginations in the being of a cosmic entity.
Fort Kirsty. Fantastic. You're absolutely right. 4.6 billion years. Number one.
Do you make, and one last thing, did you make your girls call you sir?
That's sexist, definitely.
We'll take a break, after which we're going to hear from you. If you're homeschooling, give us a tinkle, tell us why. If you've been homeschooled, how was the experience? Has it set you up for life? Or maybe you have a question for Christopher. 0207 173 5555 is the number. I know many of you dreading the thought of entertaining your kids during half term next week. Do you imagine doing it full time? We'll see you back here in a jiffy.